Hernando, in the West we have a movement, Occupy Wall Street, and it looks like an anti-capitalist, an anti-entrepreneurial movement. At the same time, you say the Arab Spring is something of entrepreneurs uprising against their governments. So how come?
Well, obviously two different realities. What we do know is that entrepreneurship is going to be in the eye of the storm for different reasons. The case, as we just said, of the Arab countries is because we're starting to understand that the majority of them are entrepreneurs, but they have no benefit of paper that gives value to the things they have, that allows you to carry credit, that allows you to carry capital, that allows you to carry identity. In the West, it's the contrary, in the sense that the West, for the first time in many, many years, has produced more paper than it has assets. So you've got all these derivative paper, you've got all this financial paper, which is not recorded, which is not fixed in any way to an asset that can be identified and tangible, which makes you understand, makes us at least at all reflect how important it is to get your paper right. If you've got too much of it, you've got inflation. If you've got not enough of it, you've got deflation. In other words, what we have is, it's not only important to have paper, that is quite clear, as we said before, no identity without paper, no credit without paper. But it is also important not to have more than is justified. And the problem with the West is that it has created a lot of fictitious paper.
So you are arguing that the financial crisis in the West can be explained by what you say is important for economic development, that you have representations of assets by legal rights.
Absolutely. And that danger, by the way, was seen by both Thomas Jefferson, who said that the biggest enemies of Western capitalism were the bankers that produce fictitious paper. And Marx said it.
It was Jefferson already, so it
Jefferson,
again 200
yeah,
years
when
later.
Marx was 1 year old.
Yeah.
He said it much before Marx. And then afterwards, Marx said there are people who cheat. And there's people, and therefore these people will always create more paper and pretend there is more value than it exists. And the reply to that is, you can always create more passports. And you can also create more money, but which you can't stop passports and you can't stop money. What you've got to have is systems that make sure that the paper corresponds to reality. What is obvious that in the West today, 21st century, the Westerners do not control reality anymore.
It has gone out of control.
It's gone out of control.
Papers that are circulating have no clear-cut relationship to assets anymore.
Well, that's the reason why you have a credit crunch. The reason credit has contracted in the West is nobody knows who they're giving credit to, because they don't know how much they've got. They've stopped recording it. They don't know where it is and who's got it that bad. Every day you see a news on Greece, you say to yourself, it's this bad. And next day you see it's worse than that. And before you know it, then Italy's worse than that. And then somebody says, no, it's really Spain. Nobody knows because they don't have the facts, which means that we've lost the control, the numbers on paper and how it relates to economic activity.
So you would say back to the roots when the West started to really put everything into documentation, and that kind of thing has been lost.
Well, yes. Well, that's the general idea. That's the general idea. The objective of paper is simply that it identifies you much quicker, much better. I don't have to bring in my house from Peru to pay for my hotel. All I do is bring in my credit card. I don't have to physically take my home and give it to you. I basically throw a mortgage, a piece of paper, and that's what transfers it. That's the beautiful thing about paper. It's the beautiful thing about checks. What happens, but to do that, the paper has to correspond to the physical asset itself. A paper cannot just simply be up in the air. So what has collapsed has been the systems of control. Finance is just simply out of control in the West.
So it's not only a representation of assets that you can commit yourself to paying something and it's accepted by somebody else because of the documentation. It's at the heart of a Western economy.
Oh, but of course it is. You see, before, in the old days, when you could only identify things at 10, 20 kilometers distance, you only traded at 10, 20 kilometers distance. When asked what made for the Industrial Revolution, both Adam Smith and Marx said the division of labor on a wide scale. It's when you were able to identify people in faraway places and your markets grew much, much bigger, that you were able then to create the volume which justified the specialization and the economies of scale. Impossible to do that without paper of some sort. And by the way, it's also since then, about 150 years ago, that people don't always just marry the girl that's been 20 kilometers away. Now you can marry girls that are 1,000 or 100,000 kilometers away, which you couldn't before, thanks to paper. You will remember that the crisis begins when there are houses in the United States that depreciate themselves so low that they're called the subprime crisis. And at that time, the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, Hank Paulson, says that he's going to have to go and intervene in Wall Street because those mortgages have been financed by derivatives, which are a financial paper that is built on the mortgages over time, and he's going to take them out, and it's about $1 trillion. So he goes out and he says he's going to extract it, he borrows the money, and then he doesn't extract it. He puts the money in the banks. And the question has since been, this is the 27th of September of 2008, is why wasn't the US Treasury capable of buying those derivatives? And the reply is, I can tell you without doubt, they couldn't find them. Because it's the first time that an asset, something of value in the history of the modern West, 150 years, that is no longer recorded. And when finally Chris Cox, the head of the Securities Exchange Commission of the United States, says, I have to tell you how much we're talking about in terms of derivatives, he points out that it's $700 trillion. If the United States produces $15 trillion a year, and the whole world, the Eurozone, the US and China produce 60 trillion, we're talking about an amount 11 times higher. And that amount, not knowing where it is, who's really in debt, who runs the risk, is the result why credit is being shortened. And there's no way out of it, because that credit is not based on dollars and coins. It's based on the fact that it lies on mortgages and other property paper that is no longer recorded. So it's a property problem, essentially. That's why you can throw as much money you want at it. It will never replace $700 trillion of property paper. That's why we've got the problem we've got now. And it's not the first time it happens in the world. It's happened before, and it's produced tremendous crises. And some of those crises led, of course, to the collapse of capitalism as we knew it then.